Well, last week we started our summer series called The Problem with Christianity Is. And the title of the summer series is taken from conversations that Christians can have with non-Christians. And if you're talking long enough about the Christian faith, someone will say, you want to know what the problem with Christianity is? And they'll give you their list of arguments of why they can't believe in Christianity, they can't believe in Jesus, or they could never be a Christian. And I wanted to begin with that video this morning by way of a reminder of why we're doing this series to begin with. We're surrounded by people who have all kinds of notions about God. They've got all kinds of ideas about God. They've got all kinds of hopes about a God that exists, at least in their own mind. But you know the problem of a God who exists only in your own mind, who's a product of only your best thinking and your imagination? That God is not a God. That God cannot save you. That God cannot change you. And that problem is compounded by the fact we talked about last week that we as Christ followers spend the majority of our time talking about matters of faith with the already convinced. We talk about our faith, we talk about Jesus, we talk about the Bible among people who, by and large, already agree with what we're saying. They already believe the same things that we believe. They think the same things that we think about God and about human nature and about the world in which we live in and those big eternal questions that people all around the world wrestle with. We talk about these things with people who already agree with us, all the while that we're surrounded by people who are growing increasingly more skeptical about the things that we believe. And so I'll remind you of the premise statement that I introduced to you at the end of last week's introductory message that ties together everything that we're going to talk about over these next couple of months. We live in a post-Christian era where the fundamentals of the faith, the things that make Christianity Christianity, are routinely questioned by an increasingly skeptical culture that is bent far from God. Therefore, here's the application, and what most of us have concluded based on that true statement at the beginning of this premise is that therefore we're going to say nothing. Therefore we're going to disengage. Therefore we're not going to have conversations with people far from God because that's messy and that's difficult and it has the potential to stir up a lot of arguments and get people mad at us. And so I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to live out my faith in front of them, but I'm never going to talk about it. Listen, that's not just wrong, it's sinful and unchristlike. What is the therefore? Because all that's true, therefore as Christ followers, we must be ready to give a defense of the faith. Why? In order to be smart? In order to win arguments? In order to put people in their place? No. For the joy of all peoples in Jesus. The reason why we're embarking on this study to try to understand these common and core arguments that come up against the faith is to equip you and I to be good evangelists, willing and ready evangelists, able to go out and have a conversation with people who are increasingly skeptical about the core truths that make Christianity Christianity, so that we can see them come to faith in Jesus. Not to win arguments, not to put people in their place and so forth. So the first question, the first problem, I should say, with Christianity that we're going to tackle as part of this series is the problem of God. And the problem of God for us is that we believe that God is as opposed to believing that God is not. And more than that, we believe in a God that has revealed himself through many evident proofs. And that's a growing problem for an increasing number of people in the culture in which we live, where agnosticism, that is saying, okay, I believe that there's some kind of God out there, but he's not very well defined, he or she or it, and they are largely detached from life in the universe. Agnosticism or atheism that says, I don't believe there's a God at all. I believe that all of this just sort of happened by random chance and mutation over time, and we're just here, and we are nothing and no one. Our life has no meaning whatsoever. We're here for a while, then we're gone. We pass into history and are forgotten. And so how I'm breaking this down for you, if you're taking notes this morning, and I hope that you are at some level, here's how you want to organize yourself this morning. One key text. That key text is Romans chapter 1, and then two key truths, okay? Two key truths, two key pieces of evidence. And you can write those down. First one, anthropology. Anthropology is the study of man. Second one is cosmology, the study of the universe. So one key passage of Scripture, Romans 1, two key pieces of evidence. So I'd have you turn to Romans 1. We're going to begin in verse 18. You'll find that on page 939 if you're using one of the Bibles from the chair in front of you this morning. In the book of Romans, as you turn there, Paul is laying out a detailed legal defense of the Christian faith. Paul in his life is arrested multiple times. He appeals based on his Roman citizenship to have an audience with the emperor of Rome, who we talked about this last week was the Emperor Nero, so that he could give a defense of the Christian faith. And the question was this in the first century: is Christianity just another part of Judaism? Or is Christianity something new? Is it something different? And so Paul, in the book of Romans, I think, is giving us a legal defense of the Christian faith. And here we are in chapter 1, and he's establishing some things for us, and we're going to pick it up in verse 18. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, because they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." Now we're going to walk through this together here a little bit this morning, but what I first want you to see is the Apostle Paul's logic in the argument that he is laying out in this passage from verse 18 to verse 25. And what he does is he lays out a truth, and then he lays out the consequences that have come upon us because of the rejection of that truth. And so the truth is this: God has revealed himself to us through the things that he has made. But instead of honoring God as the eternal, uncaused first cause of the universe, we suppress the evidence for the existence of God. Literally, we hold it down, all of the evidence all around us that says there is a God. We gather all of that up, and we try to hold that down with all of our might in order to convince ourselves that there is no God. The consequence for seeking to suppress all the evidence that God has planted everywhere in his universe to point to the fact that he exists, the consequence for that suppression of that truth is growing wrath against us. Verse 18. Increasing futility in our mind, verse 21, in the way that we think about ourselves and the world and about God. Abounding foolishness, verse 22. And then enslavement to our own lusts until, listen, pleasure isn't pleasurable anymore. That's verse 24. So now look again with me, verse 18, and we'll start walking through this a little bit. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived." Listen, loved ones, God is not hiding from us in creation. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that we are without excuse in believing that there is a God who has revealed himself through many evident proofs. Because we actively suppress that, Paul begins by saying that there is wrath mounting up against us. Wrath pictures a violent swirling wind. Okay, so this word wrath here in the Greek would have been used to describe a tornado or a hurricane. A violent swirling wind, a very destructive swirling wind. And so the Apostle Paul starts this paragraph in verse 18 by telling us, listen, there is a storm coming. Why? Because you and I are naturally bent toward suppressing or holding down all of the evidence that God has woven into creation to reveal himself to us. And here's the question that comes to my mind as I read this. Why is that the natural inclination of the human heart? Well, it boils down to one wildly unpopular, antiquated, outdated, offensive word. And that word is sin. It's rebellion. I say it like this. It's the exalted, autonomous self. It's sin that seeks us to exalt ourselves and to take the place of God in our own lives. And sin, rebellion, renders all of us as what I just call glory thieves. We're like the mouse who steals a crumb from the king's table and takes it back to all the other mice and holds it up in front of them and says, "Behold my kingdom, look at my treasure, look at what I have built for myself." And in the end, we're just mice among mice holding a crumb. And we're saying, "Look at my crumb. Isn't my crumb glorious? Isn't my crumb amazing? Don't I have the crummiest crumb of all the crumbs in the whole world?" And we want all the other mice to behold our crumb and to love us because of our crummy crumb, right? We seek to steal the glory that rightly belongs to the Creator God of the universe. And because we would seek to take the glory that rightly belongs to Him and ascribe it to ourselves, give it to ourselves, the Apostle Paul says we are earning for ourselves wrath. Destruction. Because God says in His Word that He will not share His glory with another. It belongs to Him and Him alone. But because of sin, we're all born bent toward, I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, and I don't want to have to check with anybody, and I don't want to be accountable to anybody for my choices. And so listen, we're all bent toward this. There is a God, and it's me. And that bent to our heart is earning for ourselves wrath. It's this completely disproportionate view of ourselves and our place in the universe. And that default condition, that default bent of every human heart doesn't waste any time in showing up in our lives. Paul says that it turns our mind inward and we become futile in our thinking, verse 21. Futile means empty. We become empty in our thinking. We don't think rightly about God. We don't think rightly about ourselves. We don't look in the mirror and rightly land on our place in God's universe. We don't think rightly about our circumstances and what we deserve and what we're receiving, and we deserve better and we deserve more, and if you only knew and if you only understood, and so on and so forth. And that futility reveals itself in foolishness, verse 22. And we keep running into dead ends. We think that this path is the key to my happiness. This path is going to satisfy me. For some of it, we've gone down the path of sex and relationships. For some of us, it's money and job and ambition. For some of us, it's stuff, and I just got to get the biggest boat among all the other people who like boats, and I got to get the nicest motorcycle. I got to tread easy. I want to have the nicest motorcycle, and I want to have the biggest house, and I want to have all this stuff. Because that's the way and that's going to make me happy, and that's going to set me apart, and that's going to satisfy my heart. And we keep running into one dead end after another dead end, and we're always surprised by it. We're like, how did I get here? rubbing our nose. Where'd that come from? I didn't see that coming. I mean, I thought this time it was going to be different. Yeah, I ran into a dead end in relationship, and that woman or that guy wasn't able to satisfy my heart, and I ran into a dead end with work, and I reached the top, and I was making the money, but that didn't satisfy my heart. But I thought surely this one would work. And there we are, rubbing our nose again because we ran into another dead end. And we're thinking, I did all the math. It was foolproof. What it was proof of is the foolishness of our heart. And that we are so willing to lie to ourselves. And we want to believe our own lies. And the biggest lie we want to believe is that there is no God. Because if there is no God, there is no accountability. And I can do what I want to do. And Paul says that the invisible attributes of God, His eternal power and godness, is plain to see since the beginning of time in the things that He has made. And philosophers, scientists, theologians have categorized these proofs into two big buckets, especially two big buckets for our consideration today. The first one is anthropology, that is the study of man, the nature of man, and cosmology, the study of the universe that we live in. Notice this quote by Plato. Most of us have heard of Plato. We have no idea what he actually wrote, but we think he's really smart. He lived a long, long time ago. And he said back then, there are two things that lead men to believe in God. The argument from the existence of the soul and the argument from the order of the motion of the stars. So you go back 2,300 years, and you have philosophers already recognizing these two big buckets that reveal God to us. Anthropology, the existence of the soul, no matter what your starting point is, no matter whether you're an atheist, no matter whether you're a committed Christ follower, whatever your starting point is, you have to admit that humans are not like other animals. We are different. And then the order and the motion of the stars. And again, no matter what your starting point is, you have to admit that the universe has at least the appearance of design. There is predictability and order in the universe. So no matter what your starting point is, you have to admit humans aren't like every other piece of creation, and there is order and predictability in the universe. So, anthropology. First big bucket that we want to just spend a few minutes walking through. And again, I said last week, I'm just looking to sort of grease the rails for you a little bit. If I say anything here that gets you excited, that piques your curiosity, that wants you to explore more, there's lots of resources out there for you to do that. We put them up last week. Would encourage you to chase those things down because there's no way I can give you everything that could be said. I'm just trying to give you some beginnings, some primers on these things. So the first big bucket of evidence out there that reveals God to us, anthropology, the study of man. The Bible says to us that God has written a moral law on every person's heart. And the human experience reveals that to be true. God has written a law on every person's heart that reveals right and wrong to every one of us. You can call it the conscience if you'd like. It's that inward sense that some things are right and some things are wrong, and your own experience tells you that that is true. You don't need to teach people that stealing is wrong. Put two 2-year-olds in the same room with one toy, and you will experience from the beginning, woven into us, is this belief that stealing is wrong. Because as soon as child 2 takes the toy from child 1 will rise up in opposition to that theft and try to take it back, right? One of the first words every child learns is mine. Mine. Because already, right, 1, 2, 3 years old, what are we bent towards doing? Building our little kingdom, collecting our little crumbs, whether they're G.I. Joes or they're Barbie dolls or they're whatever it is. And if you take it, even that baby knows that's wrong. You don't need to teach people that cutting in line is wrong, right? You go to the DMV tomorrow afternoon, and there's 25 people, and they're all queued up in the little cattle gates, and they're waiting their turn, and you just walk by, and you're like, hey, what's up? And you go right to the front of the line. You will find 25 strangers all of a sudden unite together in with a moral framework to say, that's wrong. They don't know each other. They didn't grow up in the same household. They didn't have the same parents, but there's an innate sense of fairness inside of every one of us that says, if I have to wait, you have to wait. If I got to stand in line, you got to stand in line. You don't have to teach children about shame. It is just woven into them. Nobody has to say to the 3-year-old when they're caught doing what their mom or dad just told them not to do, that in response to that, they should run to the couch and bury their head in the cushion. Because they don't want to look at you and they don't want to be seen, and they're still at the age to believe that if they can't see you, you can't see them, and they're hidden from you. You don't have to teach them shame. A sense of shame is woven into them. Why? Because God has planted inside every single one of us that sets us apart from every other part of creation a sense of morality, and that sense of morality gives rise to a sense of justice. There is right and there is wrong. And your experience reveals that to you to be true. And now listen. Let's extend that. If there is a moral law, there must be a moral lawgiver. This is really important. Morality cannot be the result of naturalistic evolutionary processes. It cannot be. Because the animal kingdom reveals to us naturalistic evolutionary morality. And you know what morality looks like in the animal kingdom? It's the lion eating the gazelle. It's might makes right. It's survival of the fittest. A sense of morality that says stealing is wrong can't come from evolutionary processes. Because evolution would say, if I'm stronger than you and what you have benefits me, I owe it to the species to take it from you. And listen, when the lion runs across the Serengeti and jumps on the back of the gazelle and sticks its claws into its sides and bites down on the back of its neck and drags it to the ground, and all the other lions jump onto that gazelle while it's still kicking, nobody calls that murder. But if I'm walking down the street and I miss breakfast, so I'm a little hangry, and I see a guy, I jump on his back and sink my teeth into his neck, everybody's going to say that's wrong. Why? Because humans aren't like animals. We're different. And everyone would call that murder. Everyone would call that wrong. What sets us apart? We have a spirit. We have a soul. We have the capacity woven within us to ask different questions, to ask bigger questions. You know what animals ask? Can I eat that, and will that hurt me? Your dog, as much as you love your dog, and I'm a dog guy, I love dogs, I'm a dog person, right? Your dog has never once laid out in the grass, looked up into the starry night, and wondered his place in the universe. But listen, every single person on the face of the planet has asked that question. Why am I here? What's it all about? What's it all for? Is there anything that comes next? Is there any purpose to my life? Only humans ask those kinds of questions. No other part of creation asks those kinds of questions. We live in an age where morals are considered to be relative. We introduced the idea of relativism last week in our introductory message. That's the idea that what's true for you is not necessarily true for me, and what's true for me is true for me, what's true for you is true for you, and I don't have any right to impose my truth on you because you have your own truth. We live in an age where morals are considered to be relativistic. But listen, when the relativist gives up the reality of a moral lawgiver whom they're accountable to, all they can say in response to the evil in the world is that they think that it's wrong or they don't agree with it, but they can't say that it's wrong. So the relativist looks at what Hitler did in the Holocaust in World War II, and the best they can come up with is to say, I don't agree with those choices. I think Hitler should have made different life choices and things would have been a lot better for everybody. What they can't say is that that was wrong, because issues of rightness and wrongness are moral issues. The relativist can't look at genocide in Africa and say that's wrong. All they can say is, I don't agree with that. The relativist cannot look at rape, murder, and theft. Let's bring it home, okay? The relativist cannot look at rape, murder, and theft and say those decisions were wrong. All they can say is, I don't agree with them. Because listen, Darwinism says if I'm stronger than you, if I'm smarter than you, if I benefit the species more than you do, I have a moral obligation to take what you have and consume it on myself, and I have a moral obligation to spread my seed to as many women as I can, because the species as a whole will become better the more I reproduce myself. So rape is not wrong. Rape is morally right if I have a Darwinian mindset. I got to say two things here. Maybe you've already figured them out. Relativism only works at a distance. It doesn't work up close where we live. It's easy for the philosopher, it's easy for the relativist to stand here in 2018, look back to 1945, and say that I just don't agree with Hitler's decisions, but who am I to say that genocide and the attempted extermination of a whole group of people, who am I to say that that's wrong? That completely falls apart when it's your sister who got raped. That completely falls apart when it's your friend who was murdered. Relativism only works in a sterile world. The problem is we don't live in a sterile world. We live in a really messy world. And because God has woven into every one of us a sense of morality that gives rise to a sense of justice, relativism falls apart when it hits us in our real life. It doesn't work. It doesn't even make sense. Second thing I need to say is that the social sciences, things like religion and morality, the social sciences are the only sciences where relativism is allowed and even celebrated. Nobody wants a doctor who's a relativist, right? Is my cancer markers going up or going down? Well, ballparking it a little bit, I'm going to think you're all right. Nobody wants the engineer who built the bridge that they have to drive over to be a relativist. Is this bridge in code? Does it meet all the... Well, and plus or minus, it's all right. It'll work for some, it won't work for others. It's okay. Nobody wants the pilot flying the plane that they're in to be a relativist, right? Nobody wants the pilot, to get over the intercom and says, we're on our approach and we're going to land somewhere in the area of the Elmira Corning Regional Airport. In every other area of life, people demand precision, except in terms of morality and religion. Why? Because we don't want there to be a God that we're accountable to. It's the only part of life where it's allowed and celebrated. That's anthropology. Got to move on. Cosmology. There's a principle in science called contingency. You want to write that down. Contingency. Here's the definition. Contingency is the idea that if something begins to exist, its existence is dependent on something outside of itself that pre-existed it in order for it to come into existence. So there's a lot of existing in that sentence. Let me read it again. Contingency is the idea that if something begins to exist, its existence is dependent on something outside of itself that pre-existed it in order for it to come into existence. And again, your own experience tells you that this is true. How do I know? Because there isn't any one of you here today that believes you created yourself. You are here because there was a mom and a dad who pre-existed you, and your existence is predicated on the fact that they pre-existed you. Nobody, no sane person would dare to say, I just sprung into existence one day. One day I was not, and the next day I was. I'm still trying to figure out how it all came into being. There had to be a first cause in order for me to exist. Again, give you another example. You can stack, and this is a very common example, you may have heard of it before, but you can stack all the pieces of a watch on top of one another. So you've got the watch frame, you've got the gears of the watch, you've got the battery of the watch, you've got the watch face, you've got the watch dial, the little handles that go around, you've got the watch band, and you just stack all those pieces on top of one another. Here's what you know to be true. You can wait forever, and those pieces will never turn into a functioning watch. The conclusion is, if there's a watch, there must be a what? There must be a watchmaker. If there's a creation, there must be a what? There must be a creator. And from the microscope to the telescope, everywhere we look, we see evidence of this creator in the design that he has left behind. DNA, microscope, the basic building block of life. DNA contains all the genetic information that makes you, you, and makes an amoeba an amoeba. Now get your mind around this. The genetic information in the DNA of an amoeba is a single-celled animal. It is the lowest form of animal life. It is one single cell. The genetic information that makes an amoeba would fill 1,000 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Consider this. Carl Sagan. Some of you have heard of Carl Sagan, astronomer, physicist, philosopher, agnostic. So Carl Sagan, agnostic, he's a guy who believed that there was some kind of divine force out there, but was largely unknowable and detached from his creation or her creation or its creation. He said this: the equivalent of 20 million books is inside the heads of every one of us. The neurochemistry of the brain is astonishingly busy. The circuitry of a machine more wonderful than any devised by humans. Millions and millions and millions and millions of pages worth of genetic information that makes you who you are. Extraordinarily complex. Not just as a means to transfer the information from one cell to another, but the means to even reproduce DNA, to carry that code farther and farther and farther. Notice the futility, though. Same individual says this: the universe is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Two statements made by the same individual. That statement is an absolute suppression of the truth. Not just the truth that there is a God, listen, but the truth that the universe we live in had a beginning. And everybody knows that. The truth, the universe has not always been. Whether you're a secularist and you believe in the Big Bang, or whether you're a Christian and you believe in Genesis chapter 1, where God spoke light into existence and over 6 days He created the universe that we now live in, no matter what your starting point is, everyone recognizes there was a time when the universe was not. But here's a very intelligent individual who is suppressing all that truth to say the only uncaused cause in the universe is the universe itself. Everybody knows that's not true. It came into existence, and listen, this is what's so amazing. The universe is right now expanding. Not just the galaxies moving away from one another. That's not exactly a right way to think about it. Time and space is actually expanding into non-space. Think of it like the galaxies of the universe, right, spread around a balloon. And the balloon is being blown up. And so the galaxies are moving away from one another, but because the universe itself is expanding. Again, you can read about this in other sources, but if the physical understanding of the universe was actually correct, even physicists understand that the universe would have run out of energy by now and would have already begun to contract, and that's not what's happening. It is still expanding away. Time and space are literally growing. Physicists understand that the universe is fine-tuned to exist. Physicists will talk to us about 122 variables that have to be met in order for the universe we live in to exist at all. So 122 variables, I want you to think of them as dials on a machine, okay? So get in your mind this picture of 122 dials that are lined up one after another. And this is what you need to understand. All 122 variables would need to be simultaneously set to 1 million millionths of top dead center for the infant universe to exist. If even one dial was off by even 1 million millionths of top dead center, the universe we live in would have collapsed back on top of itself into a ball of fire. Another quote. Stephen Hawking. Many of you are familiar with Stephen Hawking. Even if you've never read anything he's written, you think he's very smart. Stephen Hawking has said this: if the rate of expansion, now when you read that term, rate of expansion, what I want you to think is one of the 122 variables, okay? One of the 122 variables. If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million millionths, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size into a hot fireball. The odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. And Stephen Hawking, who is now dead and grew harder in his belief towards the existence of a God, grew against in his old age, now is very certain of the existence of a God, said this: I think there are religious implications. He says the odds, right, against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. They figured out the odds. The odds are 1 in 10 times 10 to the 138th power. What that means is you write down a little 1 on your note sheet, and then you write 138 zeros. It's 1 in 1 times 10 to the 138th power that our universe could just spring into existence with all 122 variables set to top dead center, not off by even 1 million millionths of a degree. Statisticians consider anything over 1 times 10 to the 50th power to be an impossibility. Can't happen. 1 times 10 to the 50. The odds of our universe springing into existence through something like the Big Bang, 1 times 10 to the 138th. And here's my point in bringing all of this up. The laws of physics represented in those 122 variables, those 122 dials, had to pre-exist the creation of the universe for the universe to exist. And so here's what should be going through your mind as it's sort of starting to pop right now. Who set those dials? Who set those 122 variables to top dead center so that the universe could even exist? Who wrote the laws of physics that had to exist before the universe could exist? See, what atheists will say is this, and they've been asked, you read these, Richard Dawkins and others, they will say this: physics does not have its Darwin yet. No one's come along who is able to fully explain the physical laws of the universe apart from any kind of divine intervention the way Darwin did with biology. Physics doesn't have its Darwin yet. And so what they'll say is things like this: well, our universe is just one of an infinite number of universes. And so it only had to work once, right? And so before there was time, right, because time has to be measured by something, before there was time, there was an infinite number of Big Bangs, just bang and recollapse and bang and recollapse, and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of times, and every time it banged and recollapsed, one of those dials was changed just a little bit, just a 1 million millionths, until one time, out of all these trillions and trillions of times, it was just banging and recollapsing, it was finally right. And we're living in the one time it was finally right. Listen, there's not a single shred of evidence to support an idea like that. And I want to say this in a very particular way. Yet somehow, that faith position is more palatable to them than the Christian faith position, because their faith position does not require them to be accountable to anyone but themselves. You need to understand, loved ones, no matter what your starting point is, you will always come to a matter of faith. And the naturalistic evolutionary faith position, and that's what it is, a faith position, is more palatable to most because that position doesn't require me to admit that there's a God who is over me and would say to me that certain things I'm doing are right and wrong, good or bad. And so I'm free to do what I want, when I want, how I want. And so I'd rather believe in multiple universes for which there is absolutely not a single shred of evidence than to believe that there is a God who spoke this universe into existence, has woven evidence of himself into it everywhere you look. From the microscope to the telescope to the mirror in your bathroom, you see evidence of the existence of God. I'd rather believe in this than that because that God holds me accountable. What's the result? Look at verses 24 and 25, and with this we're done. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their heart to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. If we reject God, God turns us over to ourselves. To what end? Paul says, to chase our lust until it kills us. Sin leading to more sin, living for pleasure, consuming everything and everyone in our lives, using everyone and everything in our lives to its fullest to get from them and out of them everything that we can for our own pleasure and happiness until we choke on it and until we ruin every relationship that we're in and until pleasure isn't even pleasurable anymore. Listen, do you know what you call it when pleasure isn't pleasurable anymore, but pleasure becomes painful? You know what you call that? Addiction. Every addiction starts with someone pursuing something that was pleasurable to them. But in time, that pleasure turns on them. It's no longer pleasurable, but it becomes painful. And you know what the Bible calls addiction? Idolatry. And do you know what idolatry is? It's the exchanging of the glory of God and the giving of that glory to something that's not God. Exactly what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 1. And so listen, loved ones, no matter what your starting point is, consider the fact that we are living in an age of increasing violence. The old lines of respect that used to keep people in line, even if they wanted to kill somebody, they would be hesitant to do it. They are quickly eroding away. We are living in an age of increasing addiction. You never heard about the overdoses like you hear about it now. It's all the time. We are living in an age of increasing rates of suicide, where people just conclude, I can't go on anymore. Life is not worth living. I'm giving up. I'm checking out. I'm ending it all. We're living in this age of increasing addiction, increasing suicide, increasing violence. At the same time, we've spent the last 50 years teaching our children that there is no God, that there is no Creator. And if there is no Creator, there is no morality. There is no right and wrong outside of myself. And if there is no Creator, there is no morality. There is no purpose to life. There's no reason for me to be here other than to consume everything that I can consume and to get from life everything that I can get, even if I have to take it from you. What we're seeing in addiction is the pursuit of something. The heart is yearning. And people are chasing. What we're seeing in violence, what we're seeing in suicide, is the consequence of fooling ourselves and saying there is no God. And the human heart, Every human heart, even people far from God, rejecting that idea because they know it's not true. But everybody who's smart, everybody who's over them is telling them, there is no God. There is no one outside of you. There is no one above you. And yet in their heart, they know that's not true, and they're longing to connect. And so it's drugs and alcohol. It's violence. And then when none of that works, I'm out. We rejected God, and God has turned us over. And the world we're living in is proof of it, and you know it's true. There's no other sociological, philosophical explanation for the reality of the world that we live in. It's this, loved one. It's this. Tells us, God is telling us the truth about the world we live in, and He's telling us the truth about us, and He's telling us the truth about Himself. So I want to end with this. If you say that there is no God, that's your starting point. Maybe you're here in this room and you don't believe that there's a God. Maybe you're watching online through the live stream. Maybe somebody has directed this to you, and it's your position that there is no God. Listen, it's on you to prove that God doesn't exist. Because God has proven His existence to you in countless ways. So if you want to reject all that proof that says that there is a God, it's on you to prove that He does not exist. And from science, physics, morality, sociology, anthropology, cosmology, everywhere you turn, there's evidence for the existence of God. It's on you to prove that He does not exist, because He's given us ample proof for His existence everywhere. And all these things, again, from the microscope to the telescope to the mirror in your bathroom, they all declare to you that there is a God, there is a God, there is a God, there is a God, there is a God. And listen, it's my privilege this morning to stand in front of you and to say to you, not only is there a God, but this God loves you. He loves you. And He loves you so much that He gave His only begotten Son for you, that if you would just believe in Him, if you would just believe that God made Himself visible to us in Jesus Christ, the perfect Son of God, who lived for you, lived a perfect life for you, died on your cross to pay your debt, was buried, rose again the third day triumphantly, bodily from the grave, proving that He had conquered sin, death, and Satan. He's ascended to the right hand of the Father, and He is coming again. If you will turn from your sin of unbelief and your rebellion and your natural tendency to exalt yourself, and you'll fall dead weight into Jesus, that God will save you, and the promise is you will never perish, but you will have everlasting life. So listen, not only is there a God, but there is a God who loved you, a God who died for you, a God who rose for you, and a God who is even now pursuing you.